The moment my father slammed the folder down on the kitchen table and said, "Sign it, or don't bother coming home," I realized I had spent 28 years loving a version of my parents that only existed in my head. It was a Thursday evening in late October. I remember because I had just driven 4 hours from Cincinnati back to my hometown of Dayton, Ohio, still wearing the blazer I'd had on for a presentation that morning. I hadn't even taken off my shoes when my father pointed at the chair across from him and told me to sit down. My mother was standing near the refrigerator, arms folded, not looking at me. My younger brother was nowhere to be seen, which I would later understand was intentional. The folder contained a legal document, a transfer of ownership agreement. My name was at the top, my brother's name was below it. The document was asking me to sign over the licensing rights to a diagnostic software tool I had spent 3 years building, a clinical decision support application that hospitals use to flag early-stage medication interaction risks. I had filed the patent myself, on my own dime, while working full-time as a clinical data analyst at a regional hospital network. The software had taken everything I had: weekends, savings, relationships, sleep. My father pushed a pen across the table. "Your brother needs this," he said. "He has a family now. He has real responsibilities." I looked at my mother. She finally met my eyes, then looked away. I did not sign anything that night. I picked up the folder, drove back to Cincinnati, and spent the next 40 minutes on the highway trying to understand how we had gotten to that table. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without the context of who my brother is, or rather, who my parents decided he was from the time we were children. His name is Conrad. He is 3 years younger than me, and for as long as I can remember, he has been the one my parents worried about. Not in the way you worry about a child who is struggling, in the way you excuse a child from every consequence of his own decisions because you've already decided he can't handle them. Conrad dropped out of his first college after 1 semester. My parents paid for the second one. He left that one too, this time with a DUI and a lease broken in the middle of the night. My parents covered the lease penalty. He got a girl pregnant at 23, a girl he'd been dating for 4 months. And they got married quickly in a courthouse ceremony that I flew home for and paid for the dinner after. He worked a series of jobs in sales and property management, never lasting more than 18 months at any of them. I want to be clear, I don't resent Conrad for struggling. Life is complicated. What I resent is the architecture of expectation my parents built around us, the one where his struggles were always the family's problem to solve, and my stability was treated like an infinite resource they could draw from. I paid for my own college. I took out loans, worked part-time in a hospital records department, and graduated with a degree in health informatics. I got certified, got hired, got promoted. I moved to Cincinnati for a better position and started developing the software on nights and weekends because I had seen firsthand how medication errors were killing people who should have lived. I named it ClearPath. It was mine. Every line of code, every iteration, every rejection from investors I pushed through until one said yes. By the time I was sitting across from my father at that kitchen table, ClearPath had licensing agreements with 4 hospital systems and was in active conversations with 2 more. My attorney, a woman named Adrienne who had been with me since the early days, had told me the previous month that we were looking at a valuation north of $18 million if negotiations continued on their current trajectory. My parents did not know the exact number, but they knew it was significant. My brother had apparently done enough research to understand that and had presented it to them as a solution to his problems. The problems, as I understood them, were these. Conrad and his wife had bought a house they couldn't afford in a suburb of Columbus. He had co-signed a business loan with a friend for a food truck venture that collapsed inside of 6 months. He owed somewhere between $40,000 and $60,000 across various debts, and his wife had recently been laid off. They had a 4-year-old daughter and another baby on the way. I found all of this out not from my parents, who presented the situation to me in the vaguest possible terms, but from my cousin Renee, who lived near Conrad and had been watching the situation deteriorate for over a year. Renee called me the week after the kitchen table confrontation. She said, "I don't think you understand how deep in it Conrad actually is, and I don't think you understand what they've been telling him about you." What they had been telling him, apparently, was that I was selfish. that I had always put my career above family, that I had gotten lucky with the software and that sharing the proceeds with the family was the right thing to do, morally, that a person with my kind of success had an obligation to the people who raised her. The part that made me put my hand over my mouth and sit down on my apartment floor was when Renee told me they had been saying this to Conrad for almost 2 years. 2 years. This hadn't started with the folder on the kitchen table. This had been building quietly in phone calls I wasn't part of, in a narrative about me that I had no idea existed. I asked her if Conrad knew what the software was actually worth. She was quiet for a moment. He told his wife it was worth about $40 million, she said, and that you were refusing to share it out of spite. I did not sleep well for the next several days. I went through a period of disbelief, then a period of anger, so cold and specific that it frightened me a little. I am not someone who engages in conflict easily. I was raised to keep the peace, to not make things difficult, to smooth things over for the sake of family harmony. That instinct had served everyone but me for a very long time. I called Adrienne and told her what had happened. She listened without interrupting, then asked me 2 questions. First, had I ever added any family member to any legal document, agreement, or correspondence related to ClearPath? No, never. It had never even occurred to me. Second, had I ever allowed any family member access to my work files, development notes, or business accounts? I said no, and then I stopped. I stopped because I remembered Christmas 2 years earlier. My parents had come to visit me in Cincinnati, the only time they had ever made the trip. Conrad and his wife came too. It was a 2-day visit. At some point on the second day, while I was cooking, Conrad had asked to use my laptop to look something up. I had said sure and left him at the kitchen counter. I had not thought about that in 2 years. I went to my home office and opened my laptop. I checked the file access history. It took me about 20 minutes of digging to find it, but it was there. A series of folders opened during that Christmas visit. My early patent application drafts. My investor correspondence. My hospital partnership proposal template. I sat there for a long time. Then I called Adrienne again and told her what I had found. She told me to document everything, change all my passwords immediately, and come see her first thing Monday morning. I did all 3. On Monday, Adrienne and I went through everything carefully. The good news was that the patent was ironclad, filed correctly in my name only, with documentation of the development timeline stretching back years before that Christmas visit. Whatever Conrad had photographed or noted on my laptop, he could not use it to claim authorship. The ownership was not in question. What was in question was whether he or anyone else had used any of that information. Adrienne said she wanted to look into it before I did anything else. She called me 4 days later. There had been a filing. Not a patent. Something murkier. A competing business entity registered in Delaware with a name similar enough to ClearPath to cause confusion in the marketplace. The registered agent was a man I had never heard of, but one of the listed business contacts was an email address I recognized. It belonged to a friend of Conrad's who had worked in tech sales. This was not my brother acting alone. This was coordinated. I want to describe what it felt like to receive that information, because I think people assume that when you discover something like this, you feel dramatic. Movie scene, devastated. But what I actually felt was very quiet, unsettling. Like some part of me had already known and had been waiting for the confirmation. I told Adrienne to do whatever she needed to do. She filed for an injunction first, blocking the competing entity from operating under a name that created market confusion. That was relatively straightforward. The harder part was the next conversation, the one I had been putting off with my parents. I drove to Dayton on a Saturday morning. I did not call ahead. My father was in the backyard when I pulled up. My mother came to the door before I could knock, like she had seen my car from the window. She looked at my face and her expression changed. I sat them both down at the same kitchen table where my father had pushed a pen at me 6 weeks earlier. I had brought a folder of my own. Inside it was documentation, the patent filing, the timeline, the registered competing entity, the email address connection to Conrad's associate. I laid it out calmly. I explained what had happened. I told them what Adrienne had found. My mother started crying. My father said Conrad would never do something like that. I slid the email documentation across the table. My father looked at it for a long time. He didn't say anything. My mother kept wiping her eyes with a dish towel she'd been holding when she came to the door. "I need you both to understand something," I said. "This is not a family disagreement. What Conrad and whoever he's working with attempted to do is a legal matter. My attorney is involved. The people who tried to register that entity are going to be contacted. If there is any further attempt to access my intellectual property, misrepresent ownership, or interfere with my business relationships, I will not be able to protect Conrad from the consequences of that." My father said, "You'd take your own brother to court." I said, "I didn't start this. The months that followed were the loneliest of my life." My mother called regularly at first, always circling back to Conrad, how stressed he was, how scared his wife was, how the baby was due in March, how they were facing foreclosure on the house. Each call was a variation of the same theme. His need was large, my resources were larger. Didn't I understand what family meant? I understood what family meant. I also understood that I had spent 28 years being the family member who was expected to absorb consequence without acknowledgement. I stopped answering those calls after the third one. Adrian sent formal cease and desist communications to the parties involved in the competing entity. There were some tense exchanges through attorneys. The other side, realizing there was no viable legal claim to ClearPath and that proceeding would expose Conrad and his associate to significant liability, backed down. The competing entity was dissolved. I don't know exactly what my brother was told or how he processed it. He did not reach out to me directly. Not once. In February, 6 weeks before my niece was born, I received a text from Conrad's wife. Her name is Fiona. I had always liked Fiona, in the careful way you like someone when you suspect they married into something they didn't fully understand. The text said, "I don't know what happened between you and Conrad, and I don't know the whole story, but I want you to know that I'm sorry. I don't think any of this was okay." I read it 3 times. I didn't respond right away. I sat with it for 2 days. Then I texted her back and asked if she wanted to have coffee sometime. Fiona and I met at a diner in Columbus on a gray Tuesday morning in March, 4 days after my niece was born. She looked exhausted in the way new mothers do, present but flickering. She had left the baby with her own mother for 2 hours. She told me what she knew, which was less than I expected. She said Conrad had presented the whole thing to her as a business opportunity, a chance to partner with my work. She said she hadn't known about the competing entity. She said when the cease and desist arrived, Conrad had told her it was a misunderstanding that would blow over. I believed her, not because she was persuasive, but because nothing she said contradicted what I already knew, and her shame seemed genuine. I told her I wasn't interested in blowing up her family. I told her my issue had never been with her or the kids. I told her the door wasn't closed, but that certain things needed to be different, specifically that Conrad needed to acknowledge, at minimum to me directly, what had actually happened. She said she would talk to him. I don't know what she said to him. But 3 weeks later, Conrad called me. It was a short conversation. He did not apologize exactly. He is not someone who apologizes exactly. What he said was that he had handled things badly and that he had let other people convince him of things that he should have thought through himself. He said he was sorry for the stress it caused me. It was not enough, but it was something. And when you have been starving for acknowledgement from your own family for your entire adult life, something lands differently than it should. I told him I heard him. I told him we had a long way to go. I told him his daughter was lucky to have Fiona as a mother. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "Yeah, she is." ClearPath completed its largest licensing agreement in June. I was in a conference room in Nashville when the final terms were signed, a multi-year partnership with a hospital network that covered parts of 4 states. Adrian shook my hand across the table. My contact at the hospital network, a kind, meticulous man named Gerald, said, "This is going to save lives." I thought about the night I had sat on my kitchen floor after my cousin called me. I thought about Christmas 2 years earlier, standing at the stove, trusting the people in my house with access to my kitchen and my laptop and my life. I thought about the folder my father slid across the table in October, and the pen, and how close I had come to not driving away. I did not think about whether I had made the right choices. I had made the only choices I could make while remaining someone I recognized. My relationship with my parents is different now. Not broken, not repaired. Somewhere in between, which is probably where it will stay. My mother and I talk once a week, shorter conversations than before. My father is not a man who revisits things. He has never directly addressed what happened, and I have stopped waiting for him to. What I have instead is clarity. I know now, with the kind of certainty you can only get from being tested, that my work is mine, that my name on a document means something, that the instinct I had at 22 to build something that was entirely my own, independent of anyone's approval or anyone's claim, was the right instinct. My niece is 7 months old now. Her name is June. Last month, Fiona sent me a video of her reaching for a hanging toy above her playmat, completely absorbed, trying to figure it out. Her little face was so concentrated, so serious about this problem she was working on. I watched that video 4 times. She's going to be just fine. There's something nobody tells you about being the responsible one in a family. It doesn't protect you. If anything, it makes you a target, because the people around you start to mistake your steadiness for an unlimited supply they can draw from whenever their own decisions run dry. I spent years being the one who figured it out, paid my own way, built my own things, asked for nothing. And for a long time, I told myself that was just who I was, independent, self-sufficient, fine. What I didn't see clearly until I was sitting on my apartment floor at midnight, phone in hand, was that I had also been quietly trained to make myself small enough that my success wouldn't inconvenience anyone else. The folder on that kitchen table changed something in me, not because of what was inside it, though that was shocking enough, but because of how ordinary the moment felt to my father. He slid that pen across the table the way you'd ask someone to pass the salt, like it was reasonable. Like 3 years of my work, my savings, my weekends, my sleepless nights were just a resource sitting there waiting to be redistributed. That's when I understood what had actually been happening. Not just with the patent, with all of it. Every time I had absorbed a consequence that was Conrad's to carry. Every time my stability had been treated as the family's backup plan. Every time I had smoothed something over to keep the peace. I had been teaching the people around me that there was no cost to taking from me. That lesson ends when you decide it ends. I don't think Conrad is a bad person. I think he was handed a story about me that made his ask feel justified, and he didn't examine it hard enough before he acted on it. That's a failure of something. Integrity maybe, or just the courage to think clearly when thinking clearly is inconvenient. The same goes for my parents. They chose the easier narrative that my success was luck, that my refusal was selfishness, that family obligation ran in one direction only. It was easier than reckoning with what they had built. What I know now is that actions have weight, not in any mystical sense, just the plain mechanical way that choices accumulate into outcomes. Conrad spent years letting others clean up after him, and that pattern eventually led him to a table with a cease and desist letter on it. My parents spent years excusing that pattern, and it cost them the easy relationship they had with me. I spent years absorbing things silently, and that cost me time and clarity I can't get back. But here's the other side of it. Adrian found that competing entity because I had kept records of everything. ClearPath held up in every legal review because I had documented every step of its development. The hospital systems trusted the partnership because the work was real and the ownership was clean. The discipline I had built, not just in the software but in how I managed my own professional life, became the thing that protected me when protection mattered. That's not luck. That's what happens when you take your own work seriously, consistently, over a long period of time, even when no one is watching and no one is acknowledging it. I think about Fiona's daughter sometimes, little June, reaching for that toy above her playmat, completely focused. She doesn't know yet that the world will sometimes tell her that what she's building belongs to someone else. I hope by the time she figures that out, she already knows, the way I eventually did, that knowing your own name on your own work is not arrogance, it's the minimum.